Welcome, and we are so glad to be here today and so glad that you all could join us and brave the weather and be down here at the San Antonio Public Library. Don't we have a wonderful facility this evening? I think it's great. Well, let's get started, roll up our sleeves, and welcome to our first in a series of summer workshops on autism syndrome and high-functioning Asperger syndrome, from diagnosis to independence. And we are so grateful to be here today and thankful for our sponsors. And Sam Allen is my co-presenter this evening. Sam is my son, and he has Asperger syndrome, and we're glad he's with us. Sam?
Like you said, my name is Samuel Allen. I am currently attending college, Texas A&M San Antonio, going for a Bachelor's of Business Administration in Computer Information Systems. And like my mom also said, I am diagnosed with Asperger Syndrome ever since I was the age of 10.
And thank goodness Sam is wonderful in IT and everything involving computers. So he is our IT guy for the evening. So thank you, Sam. Let's get started. And we want to thank our sponsors, first of all. HEB, who is so caring about community, underwrote the live streaming process, which we're enjoying this evening. So thank you to HEB for underwriting this program and believing in everything that we're doing. And then secondly, we'd like to thank our broadcast sponsor, Sinclair, and they are doing the live streaming this evening. And they have also been so kind in promoting those series and will continue to do so throughout the summer. Sinclair always thinks of families and community, so we are glad to have them on board. And then finally, we would like to thank the San Antonio Public Library System, because 30 branches across the city is very, very powerful. And I know that we have enjoyed the library, my family and myself, ever since the boys were little. And there is so much to do at the library. I mean, it's all about resources, isn't it? So isn't it a perfect thing to merge together to bring you this information series? So thank you to all the participating branches. And we are thrilled for those of you that are joining us live stream. So let's get started, and let's start with diagnosis. That's our first topic in the series, and one that is very, very important, because oftentimes a person can get lost. They're not sure, what to do. What is going on with my child? Do they have something? I see that they're separating or dividing quickly from other children. So this is a topic that I think is one that we need to delve into, and we're going to, right after a reminder, and I'm going to remind you of this throughout the evening, that those of you that are viewing at home, that you can give us questions, which we will respond to those. Our panel will at 7:30. And so you can go to the Asperger101 Facebook page. And we have people here who are interacting. My son Charlie, Yusuf, thank you for all that you're doing in working that. But if you have any questions throughout this, please go there. They're going to interact with you on our Facebook page. And we'll write down the questions and we'll present them to our wonderful panel at 7:30. Okay, autism, wow, isn't this a big topic? Isn't it something that we're hearing all the time? You hear that word more and more. I didn't hear about it so much when I was young, but now we hear it about every day. The numbers are rising at an alarming rate. You can just look here from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They give us the number of 1 in 68. Well, since 2007, I remember the 1 in 150, that seemed quite a bit. 1 in 100, 1 in 88, and since 2004, 1 in 68. There are some reports that listed even as much as 1 in 45. But that's just a chart. You look up there and you see the dot, and then you see the blank dots, but you know what I see? I see the one dot that's darkened, because that's my son. That affects my family. And I would assume that it affects your family too. I can look here and I can see the most beautiful faces, and it's either a parent, a grandparent, or perhaps somebody that suspects that they too might have autism. But all of a sudden that number becomes very, very real. And it did to us. I want to share throughout this evening a little bit of some personal stories with you, because I feel that that's our connection. I feel that that's where we relate and where we make this thing very, very real. You know, I'm not a doctor. I can't say I play one on TV either, but I can say I'm doing one on live stream. But I will say that I think a parent, when they raise a child on the autism spectrum, just about has the tools in their toolbox to be able to give advice later, at least to throw around suggestions, and we can all get this thing figured out together. And then, as you'll see at the end of this program, we'll be able to ask the true experts our questions. But our heartfelt tugging on our heartstrings is what what our connection is here this evening. And so with that number, it's very, very real, and it seems very, very close. And explaining autism is something that, well, I might not do it as a medical doctor would, but in all the years of understanding it, this seems to ring clearer than anything. If you were to look at autism in this circle, and what I mean by that, I mean by all the things that make up autism, the criteria that you'll hear about later, the checklist that you'll read, the things that you'll hear on all the news networks, that makes up autism. And if your child has autism and all the things within it, then you're going to notice some of these comorbidities that surround the autism itself. This is where it gets a little complex, and these are the things that you're going to be noticing in your child, and we're going to try to explain, because they might not have autism, but they may have some of the comorbidities surrounding it, such as attention deficit disorder, such as attention and hyperactivity disorder. You can have OCD, you can have anxiety, you can have schizophrenia, even develops at an older age. Somebody might be gifted, or they might have challenges processing sounds, and even depression, and most certainly sensory issues. So if you have autism and you're in this circle, then you probably have 1, 2, 3, or possibly more of those comorbidities that surround the autism itself. Now, you may not have autism, and you still may have some of those comorbidities, confusing it with an autism diagnosis. So that's why it's so important to get a diagnosis. It's so important that you might think your child, you might self-diagnose your child and say he or she might have autism, because I'm noticing maybe some sensory issues, or I'm noticing that the fluorescent lighting is making them cringe, or the sounds are loud. But it takes a lot more than that to actually have autism. So in explaining that, it shows how the signs that you're going to see and how it parlays into the actual autism diagnosis itself. Here in just a little while, we will have Dr. Berenice de la Cruz. She is the clinical director at the Autism Community Network, and she will be going more into detail of the autism diagnosis. But know this, if you're watching this and your child is newly diagnosed, or they have Asperger Syndrome, I want you to think about maybe people in your family. This was a real surprise to me, because you're going to find some traits of around the spectrum of these comorbidities, not only in yourself, maybe in your spouse, in your sister, in your brother, even in your parents. It's a very interesting mix. The mind is very, very interesting when you have somebody in the family that has autism. And let's just look at some variations, because there's quite a broad range of variations within the autism diagnosis itself. There's such variations in speech that a person may be nonverbal, or they may have advanced speech, and everything in between. You can have, on your intelligence level, the IQ, it can be a low intelligence or a high intelligence, and you're still have autism or be on the spectrum. Sensory issues, you can be hyposensitive or hypersensitive. And the difference in those is that if you are hyposensitive, you might not feel the cold. Have you ever noticed your son or your daughter maybe going out to the school bus and it's cold outside, it's freezing temperatures, and they're going out there and they say, I don't need a coat. Well, that might be the hyposensitive. They don't feel it. There's a lot of things they just don't feel. Pain, oftentimes. But then that spectrum is so large, you go all the way to the hypersensitive. Does your child ever experience where the sounds, maybe in church, are too loud? The crying baby in the restaurant is just irritating them. I gotta get out of here, I gotta get out of here. Well, that is the hypersensitive aspect. Again, all being on the autism spectrum. Social skills, wow. Now this is something I think if you're tuning in and you're watching because you think your child might have high functioning autism or Asperger syndrome, this is where you're really going to see it, is in the social skills. They can have poor social skills or maybe even pass for the neurotypical, but I will tell you the challenge is there, and we're going to discuss a lot more of that because that is something they deal with for certain. Special skills, well, they might not have any if they have autism, that's all right, they just might not have any, but then again you might go all the way to savant. Not everybody's Rain Man, remember that movie? When Dustin Hoffman, they threw the toothpicks, I was impressed. I thought it was a great special super skill. Well, not everybody has those savant skills, but oftentimes they do. Now, if we're looking at this right now, the variations within the autism spectrum, high functioning autism and Asperger syndrome typically will go over on this far right-hand side, but not always. It can be a mix in between all of them. No one child with autism is exactly the same, but you can more see it along that side and maybe be able to identify with it. So let's continue looking. And I will say this, we have little technical problems, that's okay. For those that are here and for those also watching the live stream, I will tell you what Temple Grandin said. I won't be able to do it as well as Temple does, but she does say in this brief soundbite that autism is a very broad spectrum. On one end, you have Tesla that invented the power plant, and on the other end, you have somebody who is nonverbal. So it is a very broad spectrum. And she talks about herself and how she has been diagnosed with high-functioning autism. And that's more or less what we're going to be talking about this evening. And, you know, when we talk about autism, I'm going to give you a lot of facts and a lot of figures, and we're going to go through, and you're going to write some things down, and we'll be able to reference it later. But I think something very, very fascinating to know is what would it feel like to have autism? And our son Sam actually drew did a painting here several years ago, but this is one of the favorites that people have when we go to a conference because he drew what it felt like to have autism. Sam, would you mind explaining?
Yeah, let's see. This was just, like my mom said, this was how it felt. Like I kind of feel like a translator for all of you. For those who want to know what it feels like to have autism. But the black and white background I chose to represent how we tend to see things in a black and white perspective. You know, we try to see things in gray, but we just can't. It's hard for us. The colors in the mind represent how we tend to have hidden abilities that have yet to come out at some points and will eventually show up at some time. And the white lines above the head represent how, when we try to speak what's on our minds, it tends to get distorted by our social awkwardness.
And, you know, and that shows in the painting Sam did, and if you've noticed, that's what we put into our logo. It's a very intricate part of Asperger 101. So I love that personally, but then again, at conferences, this is usually a stopper because people say, oh, can I take a picture of it? Because that allows them to feel what maybe their child is feeling with autism. So thank you for that, Sam. So what might high-functioning autism or Asperger syndrome look like? So maybe you're noticing a few changes, a few challenges. On a personal note, we didn't know with Sam until he started elementary school because he was my first child. And so with that, everything was, I had nothing to compare it to. I didn't have anybody else in family with autism. So once he started kinder, he started to divide a bit from the other kids. We noticed the other kids would play, and as long as they would follow Sam, well, that was great. But if Sam never followed them, I still didn't quite get it until first grade started rolling around. And then all those kids that would run after and be with Sam, all of a sudden weren't there anymore. They didn't follow him because Sam didn't follow them. So the social started falling by the wayside, but it wasn't until on into first grade that his grades started dropping. I don't know if any of you have noticed that or are experiencing that, but the grades began to fall, and I knew Sam was so super bright. He always seemed so at home. His speech was very elevated at an early age, yet his grades kept dropping and dropping and dropping. So we started doing some tests. I thought maybe something was going on. At that time, I was working full time. Had somebody come into the home, was watching both Sam and Charlie. And so they did some tests with some little dolls to see if something was going on strange. They said, no, nothing we can see. Everything seems to be fine. So Sam went through the school psychological testing, as well as we, took him to a clinic as well. And then it kept going on till fourth grade. And by this time, we were pulling our hair out. We were wanting to help him. We could see that there was something there, a block, and we wanted to lift it. Didn't know what it was. Until one day, the assistant principal said, Ms. Allen, would you mind coming in my office? She said, I want to share something with you. I know you and Mr. Allen both have been very passionate and caring and want to find out what is unique about Sam and what are the challenges. She said, I just attended a conference, teacher's workshop, and I am so sorry that we didn't catch this sooner. She put a sheet of paper on the table, and she pushed that piece of paper across the table, and it was a checklist for autism. It was the one that we're about to go over here in just a moment. And as I read each one, I wept. And I didn't weep out of just sorrow. I wept out of relief, because it was the first time somebody said something that made sense about my son. And all of a sudden I knew that there was maybe a problem in the cafeteria with the smells that were coming from there that were so overwhelming that was setting them off for reading class, which happened 2 periods later. I had no idea, and they didn't either. We learned together. So from that point on, everything was, okay, let's roll up our sleeves. I found out what it consisted of, and I want you to find that out too. So we're going to share with you is the very checklist, and I really haven't found much better than this since then, but this is the very checklist that was given to me by Northeast ISD. I wish I could attribute it to something in particular. I don't know, other than they gave it to me. I didn't see a name on it, but we're going to read this off, and we're also going to have all this later on our website to be able to share with you, so you can print this out at a later date. And Sam, why don't you go ahead and read it over, and I'll check back with everybody after each grouping is read.
Social interactions. This is actually interesting because, as my mom said, I never really meshed with the children when I was a kid, and I look back on it now, and it's clear, knowing that autism is the reason I just didn't want to socialize with any other child. But the checklist goes as: the child prefers to play alone. The child is rarely invited by others to play in the neighborhood or to participate in activities outside of school. The child's social interactions and responses are immature, not keeping with his/her age or his/her cognitive abilities in other areas. The child has difficulty interacting in group settings. The child does not play with other children as expected. He/she may not appear interested in their games or may not know how to join in. The child appears to be vulnerable to teasing, bullying, and being taken advantage of by others.
Okay, so let's look at that. Social interactions. Are you noticing this? It was very, very evident. I mean, even in the neighborhood, when other kids would get out in the street and they're playing football, and the dad was out there and he's throwing the ball, well, here would come Sam, and shock of all shocks, sometimes even the parent didn't want our children playing with their children, the big soccer football heroes. It was perplexing at the time, but now a lot of it can make sense. If you're noticing this, you're going to notice it very quickly. If your child has already started the school age years, then this is something that you've noticed. I know some people in the audience here have children that are a little older, some are younger, so it can go, it can go either way, but this is definitely something that if they do indeed have high functioning autism or Asperger, this is going to it's going to just jump off the page to you. Okay, Sam, let's go to the next section.
Behavioral observations. The child has difficulty understanding the effect his/her behavior has on others. The child has a significant amount of difficulty taking the perspective of another person, even when it's explained to them. The student has overwhelmingly limited interest in things such as video games, superheroes, or cartoon characters. The child's choices of toys or activities are limited to a select few without being open to trying new things.
Okay, so is that all for that section, Sam?
Yes.
Or is there, okay. So behavioral observations, wow, that can pretty well jump off at you too. There's usually an intense absorbed interest. If somebody is on the autism spectrum or they have Asperger syndrome, there's an absorbed interest in one thing. So it might be trains, it might be the universe, it might be, could be a lot of this online gaming. You're going to find there's one thing that they're interested in, but you know what? That thing might be the source of what their future is. I mean, this is important. I mean, it's good to nurture what they're interested in. And as you would any child, you have to look at the things that are good and bad for them. I mean, if it's something they're interested in that it's going to cause them harm, especially, with the internet nowadays, well, you have to watch over that. But I'm going to give you an example. I had somebody call me one time, and she had seen the website, and she was from another state, but was visiting near San Antonio. And so she asked, could I have a cup of coffee with you and discuss my son, who I feel has Asperger syndrome? I said, most certainly. So we met, we sat down, and we had a cup of coffee. And she brought her son with her, which that was great. She brought her daughter. That was great too. So as we're talking, she's talking and not even acting like the son is there. And before I know it, the daughter and the mother start talking about, oh, he does this, and oh, he does that, and oh, he has this interest, and his interest is in guns. Oh, brother. And by the time this goes on and on, I finally want to talk to the young man. Come to find out, yes, his interests are in guns, but it doesn't mean necessarily he's going to be the guy in the UT Tower, with the gun shooting. I think this is what she had imagined. No, but he loved the mechanics of guns, so there's a place for that. It could be on an assembly line somewhere, or he could even be at a museum. Can you imagine a Western museum where he gets to talk all day long about guns and the people come through? So there is an absorbed intense interest in something. Might be Thomas Tank Engine, that sounds familiar to you, but while they're there, do something with that. I mean, Jennifer McElwee Myers is a famous Aspie and self-diagnosed Aspie, and she has written several books, and one of the things she says is that when she was young, she loved Star Trek and anything to do with the solar system. So her family watched Star Trek. And you know what they did? They watched Star Trek, and then she could, learn behaviors from Captain Kirk and ask questions. It engaged conversation in the family. And she related to Spock, but she loved Captain Kirk. And also, her family would go out and lay out, put a blanket on the grass, look up at the stars, and talk about the constellations. Isn't that great? So a lot of good can happen with that intense interest, and oftentimes it changes as they age. Sam?
Behavioral observations continued. The child's play appears to be scripted or like a reenactment, such as repetitive recreating movies or favorite stores with word and action. The child displays limited understanding of or involvement in role play and spontaneous make-believe play. The student's play is marked by imitation rather than cooperative interaction, for example, parallel play. The child has great difficulty with unexpected changes, even when prepared for the change ahead of time.
Okay, so when they are interested in a particular program, make sure it's a program that you would want them to emulate, because they are going to emulate it. So if it's Star Trek, I will tell you King of the Hill worked for us. There was somebody in King of the Hill characters that were all within every neighborhood. And even now, we can look and see there's a Bill Dauterive. So you can see behaviors and know, oh, this person probably should take better care and maybe take a shower every now and then, like Bill Dauterive, and then maybe he might, you know, be able to mesh with some of the women he would like to mesh with. So it opens up conversation. That's not a bad thing. Realize it can be a tool. I will advise, though, be careful of the programming that you choose. Okay, Sam, let's continue.
Now on to communication. The child demonstrates severe delays in communication skills or is nonverbal. The child lacks natural turn-taking skills when conversing with peers. The child has difficulty following change of topics of conversation in response to the lead of a conversational partner. The child has difficulty maintaining conversation with others when the topic is something other than that of their interest. The child has difficulty using and/or understanding nonverbal cues, such as facial expressions, body language, and gestures. The child tends to interact with adults rather than peers. The child tends to make the same social mistakes repeatedly, although their skills improve in other developmental areas.
Okay, some things are taught. You know, I loved what Dr. Temple Grandin would say when she said, autism is not an excuse for bad manners. Hey, that's pretty strong, isn't it? So things can be taught. And how to shake somebody's hand, how to look them in the eye. Now, they might not be able to look a person in the eye for any long period of time, but they most certainly can say, hello, how are you doing, and have a good handshake. And also with that propensity to just stay on that topic and drive it home and then go some more. Sometimes it helps to say, okay, time out. I'm fascinated by the rings of Saturn, but we've been talking about it for like 15 minutes, so maybe I could talk about something now. You just need to work through it and role play and teach. And a lot of those basic skills can be taught. Okay, Sam.
Sensory and motor issues. The child has fine motor difficulties. The child has gross motor difficulties. The child exhibits oversensitivity to environmental stimuli such as sound, temperature, pain, reflection, or textures. The child exhibits undersensitivity to environmental stimuli such as sound, temperature, or pain. The child appears awkward and uncoordinated in a way different from same-age peers. The child displays excessively repetitive bodily motions, such as rocking, flapping, spinning, or self-aggression.
Do any of these sound familiar? Are they sounding familiar to you? Does it seem like something that might be in your home, with yourself, with your child, or whoever you're watching or here for? Well, this is the list. This is the checklist to give you that aha, okay. Now, maybe this is something going on here. And most certainly on each and every one of these, we could talk an awful long time, and I would love to. And that's why that we've broken this down into 4 different series, because we're going to be able to talk more in depth about social development, and then we're going to talk more in depth about the choices in education. There's plenty of them. And then we're going to talk about independence. So all these things, there's so much to discuss, and each one I would love to keep on going with you, but we have just a certain amount of time this evening. But I know that each one of those merits an awful lot of conversation. And know this, that from Sam being in 4th grade to 22 years of age, and driving and completing his associate's degree at the San Antonio colleges, and now furthering on to get your major in, what is it, Sam? It's business?
It's a Bachelor of Business Administration in Computer Information Systems.
And so I'm just saying that it's a long road, and what you're reading now, if you're at the very beginning of your journey, and you're listening to this, and or you're here this evening, I want you to know from the bottom of my heart, the reason why I'm doing this is because of you. Because I've been there. I've been right at the beginning where I can't breathe, or it looks insurmountable, or these lists, each one of them seems like it's such a difficult thing to get past or to aid my son with. But I'm here to tell you, I fast forward all these years, and I want you to know it can be done. You know, you stick together. You're the captain of the ship. You're the one that gauges what's good for your son, both in your education, both in the people that surround you. And, you know, really, anything that's negative, make them walk the plank and just get off that ship that you are charting, because this is your child's life, and it is a slow process. It's not something that the schools need to handle for you. It's something that you need to navigate, work with the schools, or if you're homeschooling, that's something that you would do. Get the people within your family or friends, whoever is a good, positive support, and know that each one of those bullet points that we just went through are workable. Each one of those things is a person, it's your child. And it's going to be amazing, the journey that you're going to go on. And we will discuss it. And I'm not flippant because we're moving on from it, but it's just a time restraint. And let's get into the science behind understanding high-functioning autism and Asperger. I have to tell you, I got so excited about this part because at first I thought, you know, I didn't understand fully why Sam would act or react to things as he did or that he didn't do. And at the start of the journey, I was concerned about everybody else's opinions, because we could be at the grocery store and it had been a long day and we're tired. He's probably more tired, and there's a screaming baby that most people think is kind of cute in a certain way, but it's irritating him, and he's at the very end of his rope, and everything is just coming to a peak, and you get those bad looks of, it can happen anywhere. You could even have them, from family members. You can have them in church, and it's that your child might be acting up, and in actuality, all they're doing is trying to cope from the loud sounds or the stimuli, and they're rocking, they're doing this coping mechanism, and it's making them feel better. But it might not make this person over here feel any better who doesn't understand it, right? So, but just know, feel strong in what you are, and know that this next part, which I can't show you, is true, and that is a soundbite from Dr. Janessa Manning, and it's no more than this. Believe me, I've got this thing memorized. And she is stating that it is not bad behavior that your child is doing, but what it is that they're wired differently. The fusiform gyrus, the frontal lobe of the brain, is wired differently, and that causes this person to act or react differently than what's called a neurotypical brain. So somebody that is not diagnosed with autism is going to process things a certain way. We know what that is. Well, do you know what it feels like when there's fluorescent lighting or a loud booming sound that's abrupt and all of a sudden? No, but a person that is wired differently would, and that means the anatomy of the brain is different. Let that soak in. The anatomy of the brain of your child with autism is wired differently. So it's not bad parenting. It is not bad behavior when your child is acting up. It's the fact that it really hurts when that loud, abrupt sound or someone came up and shocked them from behind. It's like described to me as an ice pick to the brain. It hurts. So to hear that the brain is wired differently, and to understand that, and to know that where we're going with this is that MRI, or basically brain imaging, can show the difference, and we're not too far away. And there's some doctors in the audience that would be able to elaborate a lot more than I do. But we are not far away from diagnosing autism with an MRI versus behavioral observation. It's not that far off, because there is that physical difference. So I think that gave me comfort as a parent. As somebody non-trained, it made me know, okay, wow, my son's brain's wired differently. To me, that seems like a sci-fi movie, and really cool, because once you start learning what they can do and the way the brain fires differently than yours, it just starts getting to the good stuff. It does. Now, I told you I was going to come back to this. I want you to know again that welcome you if you're watching us live streaming, that you can go to Facebook, to the Asperger 101 page, and we have someone monitoring, and they will be taking your questions. Any questions you have, know that at 7:30 this evening, we have our panel of experts right here with us, and you'll be able to, we'll read those questions to them, and they will be able to answer them on the live stream, and that will be from 7:30 to 8 p.m. So feel free, go to the Asperger101 website where you can start writing in your questions, and we'll take them for you. And we come to the program now that I'm going to turn this over to our special guest for the evening, Dr. Berenice de la Cruz, and I just think so much of this woman. I will tell you, she has done so much for the Autism Community Network, and they are the ones that did originally diagnose Sam. So I love the clinic. They're based here in San Antonio, and how they will take a person, and once your name comes up, you're on a waiting list, but once they get you there, you will go in and you will be seen, and they can calculate whether they believe your child has autism or they do not have autism. If they believe they do, they come back, and then you have a full day where you have different doctors and therapists looking at you, and then they come to that conclusion at the end of the day. So I love the Autism Community Network, and I think I'm putting you in good hands when I introduce you to Dr. Berenice de la Cruz.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that very nice introduction. Well, can you advance the slide? Thank you. What we're going to start talking about now is the difference between Asperger's and high-functioning autism. So the way that we diagnose autism spectrum disorder is by utilizing the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders. And there was a new revision that came out in 2013, so a few years ago now. And from that, the term that was originally used prior to that in the DSM-4-TR was pervasive developmental disorders. And so we've kind of transferred over to using the term autism spectrum disorder. And although it's really only been 3 years since we've been using that term in practice, we've been using that term a lot longer. So what I want to talk a little bit about is in the DSM-5, we have the terminology autism spectrum disorder as kind of just one disorder, versus the DSM-4 had Asperger's disorder and autistic disorder, and then pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, kind of as 3 different disorders under that umbrella of pervasive developmental disorder. And I am a researcher at heart, and so I always like to go back and see what the research has to say. So the reason why this change was done in the DSM is because they looked at the studies and they determined that really there was no differences going on in when they were looking at research studies for children and people with autism for DSM-4 to DSM-5. So then what I've done is I've looked at what studies have been published to really look at, can we differentiate why high-functioning autism is versus Asperger's? Because we hear that word, high-functioning autism, and then we identify Asperger's, but Asperger's is not its own category anymore, and so what are those differences, and is there an actual difference? So in 2014, there was a study done that looked at 125 research studies, and they looked at autism spectrum disorder versus autistic disorder. And they compared that these two were very similar conditions, only 30 of those. So the minority of those concluded that those were the same, whereas most of those studies concluded that there was actually some distinctions between both of them. Then 37 studies compared PDD and OS with autistic disorder, 9 found no differences, and 28 found quantitative and qualitative differences. So this is looking at the different subtypes of autism spectrum disorder, if you will. And really what the implication for practice, the takeaway is, there really appears to be very clinically different areas that we're seeing in differences in people that are diagnosed with high-functioning autism versus Asperger's. And we're going to talk about next what those differences are that the recent research is showing us. So the first one is related to motor skills. What we know is that a study in 2012 found differences in gait patterns of people with high-functioning autism versus Asperger's. So the way that they're moving is different, and something that we can actually observe and determine that that is very different. The second difference that has been found is stride length, so that can kind of be related in their pattern, how long their stride lengths are. We're finding some of those motoric differences in people with high-functioning autism. Also, abnormalities in arm posturing. We're seeing some of those abnormalities. So the way they might posture their arms might be very different in high-functioning autism versus Asperger's. So some of these things that we don't really think about, Jennifer was talking all about the communication, the stereotype behavior, the socialization, and some of them is these motor skills, but there really has not been a big focus on this area, and we are having different research studies that are showing that there are differences. And then impairments in motoric preparation or initiation in high-functioning autism. So what does that mean? That means, I have to, this is like the motor planning kind of, I have to go from one place to another, and I have to know how I'm gonna get there. Sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go to the door, and I know that I have to go around, and I know exactly what to do. And sometimes we have our children that are not able to do that. They might, really stumble, like run into the chairs, those kinds of things. So those are the differences that we're seeing, is that motor planning is really being affected, which then implicates the cerebellum. So Jennifer was talking about how the brain is really wired differently. And so because the cerebellum is controlling some of this, then this is really indicating that some of those differences are coming from brain differences that we see in people with high-functioning autism. That just kind of continues. So let's go to our next area. So if we look specifically at IQ, so you have an intellectual test functioning, is we look at total IQ score, right? That kind of tells you how capable is this person, and that is broken up into verbal IQ and performance IQ. So your verbal IQ is going to have to do a lot with communication. So if people have a good communication ability, they might really score highly on that. And then we have our performance IQ. So those are more tests of like blocks, like building stuff, figuring things out, which our kids tend to be really good at doing. So what the research has shown from that is that in people with Asperger's, we have higher both full-scale IQ, or not both, all three, full-scale IQ, verbal, and performance IQ. So all of those scores are higher as compared to people that are diagnosed with high-functioning autism. And then specifically in people with Asperger's, that verbal IQ is actually higher than that performance IQ. So this is what people have talked about, the little professor, right? So even at a young age, these children that are walking around using big vocabulary, they really like words. And they heard somebody say something, and they're gonna say it in the exact same way, and they develop this really rich vocabulary even very early on. And so this is a reflection of that, where their verbal IQ is gonna be really high versus children with high functioning autism, where we don't see that. We see that verbal IQ is actually equal to that performance IQ. So the conclusion from this study is that Asperger's and high functioning autism are really two different subtypes of autism. So they maybe fall under the autism spectrum disorder, but there really are some specific differences there as noted by the IQ. So let's talk about what to expect when getting a diagnosis. So as Jennifer was talking, and you're reading some of these things or hearing about them, and you think, this might be my child, this might be me, or somebody that I know, then, when would you seek an evaluation? And really, when you would be concerned is if it's impacting your daily life. So all of us might have some things that bother us, like, even tags. When Jennifer was talking about that hypersensitivity, I remember tags really bothered me early on, and my mom had to cut the tags off. But if that's all she had to do and I was able to cope with my environment, then that's not going to be termed a disorder, something that I need assistance for. It's when, I can't handle the sound of the air dryer when I go, the hand dryer, when you go into the bathroom, so I can't even go into the bathrooms, or I don't even want to go anywhere related to a store because I can't, my brain cannot handle that. So it's when it really starts to impact your daily life that then we need to look at perhaps being evaluated. And for that part, we usually have an initial screening. So, you know, depending what it is, it might be like a one-time appointment just to determine what are the areas that are of concern to you about your child. You know, if your child is old enough and verbal, then talking to that child as well to determine those areas that are implicated. And then, you know, if it's determined that, you know, we probably see some red flags for high-functioning autism or Asperger's, then we'll want to do a more in-depth evaluation. And that will consist of, you know, sitting down and really speaking to you as the parents. As I said, also talking to your child. If they're able to, we want them to really participate in that process. A lot of the times it's those checklists, just like Jennifer received at the school district, you know, asking you to, you know, fill things out and check them out. And those are all great things because they're what we call standardized. And so what they've done is they kind of have taken a sample from our population and have said, well, how do most people score on this? And then, you know, how do people with autism, Asperger's, or high-functioning autism score? And say, okay, if we're seeing these scores, then this person is at risk of autism. And so we want to be able to include some of these checklists as well. And for sure, there should be a period of observation. So the diagnosis, I don't believe, should just be made based on talking to somebody about it. It should really be interacting with that child. And even now, you know, I still hear about, you know, the cases where mom, you know, as parents, you go online and you look up and, you know, what is autism? And you go in there and, you know, all the criteria and you're like, I really think my son has autism. And sometimes that's how they get the diagnosis. And, you know, the pediatrician or the neurologist maybe didn't. I'm not saying most people do that, but this happens. What I'm saying is it's really important for the professional that you're seeing, whether it be a neurologist, your primary care provider, a psychologist, to really have an opportunity to interact with your child. So it should be more than a 30-minute appointment because I want to get a chance to get to know that child. You know, at Autism Community Network, we do like a half day where we bring in the child and we really want to get to know them. Because in the end, you don't only want a diagnosis, you want to know what to do. And in order for us to be able to give some accurate recommendations, we have to really get to know your child. And then I can say, oh, this really worked well. These are some of the things that you can try, because it's not just about getting the diagnosis, it's, you know, what do I do after this? So formal testing. So there will be standardized assessments that can be done. So some of them, depending on the age of your child, may be play-based assessments. So there is the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, which is the ADOS, and it's version 2 now. And so yeah, that's a play-based assessment for younger children. For older individuals, it might have some things to interact with, but it's a lot of questions, asking them about things. And that assessment was specifically created in order to diagnose autism. And so everything that's in there, like there's an activity for the younger children about using bubbles. And, you know, all children play with bubbles, but we're looking for very specific things in there. Or, you know, for older children that can talk, or adolescents, there are questions about, you know, how do you, you know, what do you think is a friend? You know, who is your friend, and how do you know they're your friend? You know, where do you want to live when you grow up? Kind of getting them to think about the socialization and our roles in our families, because those are the things that are impacted. You know, a lot of the times it's about perception. It's not that our children are not bright, it's how they're perceiving. You know, I always remember Dr. Tony Atwood, who, you know, does a lot of research in the area of autism and Asperger's, and he shows, you know, a picture of a child. It's a little boy, he's holding a basketball, and then his sister comes up to him and he's handing her the basketball, and there's a broken window. You can see the broken window, and he's handing it to her. And so it's, you know, things that we'll ask him, well, you know, what's going on here? So we might show a picture like that, and we might say, what's going on here? You know, and, you know, a neurotypical child, a child that doesn't have autism, might say, like, well, he broke the window, so he's handing it to her so he doesn't get in trouble, right? a child with autism or Asperger's might not really pick that up and maybe more focus on the fact that, you know, I don't think this illustration is correct. That ball is really big and that hole is really small. So if you really would have thrown that ball through the window, it would have made a bigger hole. So the perspectives there are a little different, and those are the things that we're going to be looking for to really get to know your child. So we take all of that, we follow the diagnostic and statistic manual, and also clinical judgment. Because for children that are very high functioning, it's not always clear cut. There's not as much research, and especially for females, for women, you know, there's, you know, 1 in 5. So for every, you know, 5 boys, there's 1 girl with autism. And a lot of times it's because the girls can be really good at hiding it. You know, they kind of are observing and they're like, okay, I'm going to do whatever Janet does because she's the cool girl, so I'm going to just do what she does and, you know, follow along. And then they kind of get along until they get to a point, and they might not be diagnosed until later, where they get to a point where they can no longer do that. Or maybe get diagnosed because, you know, they start, you know, becoming depressed or engaging in, you know, behaviors that are not good for them. And so we really want to be aware of those things early on and really help them and support them. So for the feedback, you expect to get a diagnosis and also recommendations, not just, does my child have autism, but what do I do specifically? What therapies would be good? You know, where are my resources specifically here in town? And those are the things we're really interested in. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jennifer.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful and very, very enlightening. And it is very difficult to know the high functioning autism versus the Asperger, and I get asked that a lot, and it is confusing. With the DSM-5 coming out, it's very confusing. I think one of the things that I loved, real simplistic, was told to me one time, was that, you know, high functioning autism, usually nonverbal till age 4 or 5, and Asperger syndrome, usually the little professor syndrome, and they have that big speech early on, but then by the age of 6 on, it's treated very much just the same. So very, very interesting. Well, I will say we still have some time if you want to go on Facebook and ask your question, but let's look at this. You have the diagnosis, now what? Or you suspect it, now what? Well, let's just look at this for a moment. To tell or not to tell. You know, I have some very good friends, and their children have Asperger syndrome, and they just go with it, and they don't have the diagnosis official. It's very obvious that they do, but they have selected not to, and their children consequently are doing very, very well and working at NASA or wherever, and they chose not to tell them. But I want to share a story with you. My own personal feeling is, if somebody has high-functioning autism or Asperger syndrome, they probably know that they have it. I mean, it was Sam that told me that after he knew he had Asperger, he had gone into high school, and all of a sudden there was something a little different with him. And he told me, he said, "Mom, I believe I've developed OCD. I think I have OCD." And you know, he did. And so more than likely, they know that something's unique and different about them, and it will probably be a relief to know, because then they can understand their brain just a little better. Sam, do you mind if I tell the story about the questions, or do you want to, that we typically have at a conference? It's usually the same question over and over that they ask you.
Oh yeah, it's, isn't it the question about telling if I...
Yes.
Can I give my answer?
Please. Right. Somebody will ask Sam, Sam, should I tell my kid that they have autism?
I see no reason that you should hide it from them. I say, go ahead and tell them, because you don't really want them to go through life knowing, you know, they have some unknown, you know, reason why they're acting up, or why they have sensory issues. I say they need to know why they are having these sensory issues and why they're having these problems not being like the other children.
It seemed to help with Sam, but then again, that's a very personal issue. It's something you will look at. I will say with the diagnosis, you do get assistance from schools, from public schools. I think it gets tighter and tighter with the schools, but if your child is in public school and you do have that diagnosis that you can give, the people at school, then you've got all this help available to you that otherwise would cost an awful lot of money. And they have that assistance to be able to take them out, say when the school bell is ringing, which they did that for Sam all the way up till 12th grade, and it helped him a lot with the anxiety. So to tell or not to tell, it's a personal decision, but I will say this: if you do have the diagnosis, you have the official diagnosis, and you're able to receive help if you so choose public schools, and the child will know. Find your support. Remember what I said earlier, you're the captain of your own ship. You have this big ship, and those seas are going to toss and turn as life goes, but you know what? If you have a great team on board, and that might mean, your doctor, it might be a behavioral therapist, it might be just somebody up at school who cares, and it might be your spouse, and if you're not married, it might be your parent, it might be a neighbor. It might be just one or two people on that ship, and you might be lucky and have a lot more, but have the people on board that you can count on and that your child can count on that's positive, and really use that plank if you want to. And if he's involved or she's involved in something at school and the peer pressure's too much and it's not good, you know what? They don't have to be on that speech or debate team. It's not a life or death thing. If that makes them stressed, just get rid of that. That's okay. Navigate that ship accordingly. You can chart your own course, and the course is, of course, to help them towards independence. And get your child the support that he or she may need. We can't, not everybody has the funding to get help and have those private lessons and all that. I'm so there. I quit work when we found out about Sam, and it was very, very tight budget-wise. But I can say this, that there are programs out there, and it's the very reason why we started Aspergers 101, is because I wanted a free resource, somewhere I could go 24/7. And I will tell you, the people that post on there, the blogs, a lot of them are here today, and they're brilliant. They offer so much insight, so much information, and you shouldn't have to pay for that. We can count on each other. We can relay information, and I can look ahead to somebody who has a child down the road, and I can look for their opinions. But you know what? We're a support system. We are. We're here because we care. Everybody here's here for a different reason. Some are here because they're being paid. I'm kidding. No, we're all here because we're cared, and people volunteer their time and they want to help. So let's rely on each other, and let's look at resources that are available to us, because you can navigate, you can learn and help work this area, that area, the sensory issues. How do you overcome it? How they do with other children. We can overcome it. Going through the schools, you can overcome it. And Sam, can we go back one more? And no matter the age, roll up your sleeves and get busy. I've heard people say, I just found out, and I'm 65 years old, and I just found out that I have Asperger Syndrome. I got this diagnosis. Now I understand why I was the way I was. Now I understand why my wife left me all these years ago. You hear all kinds of stories. But what I'm here to tell you is, no matter the age, no matter if this is your child you're talking about right now and you're finding out about, or yourself, it's never too late, and it's really fascinating. It's interesting. We're all in it together, and I'm going to hope that you stay with us throughout this summer series and you would join us, because each one's going to get better and better and better. And these experts that we have here are, they're great. I got to tell you, they helped us with our children, and they'll help you with yours as well. So with that, let's get ready. Charlie, if you want to help us with the chairs, and Sam too, and then let's get our panel of experts up here. And let's ask anybody here in the audience if you have questions for our panel of experts. We have some time here. And if you want to come forward, we have a microphone up here. And we can get you to ask your questions, and the panel will be able to answer them. Again, if you're viewing from home or one of the other branches, go on to the Facebook page of Asperger101. We have, Yusuf here has been taking all the questions and writing them down, and so we're going to be able to ask the panel. And I will say, in closing, as I step down and join the panel, and if y'all would like to come on up, I would love to have y'all. I'd like to say thank you again to our sponsors, to HEB, who allowed this. You sure? Who allowed this to happen and underwrote all the live streaming services. I thank Sinclair for being such a part and media partner and being able to get the word out. And the San Antonio Public Library, what a great resource. Utilize them. There's 30 branches in San Antonio, and I will tell you, Caitlin, with the library, that you and Regina have no idea how great you guys are. I had received so many messages throughout the week on Facebook from people from other states saying, why don't we have this? Why don't we have this? And I said, well, just watch what the San Antonio Public Library is doing, and maybe you can duplicate that as well. But we're here for the long haul, and anybody out in the audience that has any questions, we'd love for you to come up and to the microphone, and we will get our hand. Let's see, do we have our handheld mic? We do. Okay. And you want to go ahead and see what questions we have, and we'll get started with your questions. You know what? I'm going to have one while you go ahead and get up to the mic. I have a question. So, in getting a diagnosis, sometimes the public schools can get them wrong. I mean, it happened in my family. And then we went and we had a clinic actually do the final diagnosis. How does that work now? That was many, many years ago. When someone needs a diagnosis, where do they go? Is the school enough, or do we need to go to a clinic, or how does that work if somebody needs to get a diagnosis?
I think there's no one answer. I know that some school districts do a very excellent job with diagnosing autism spectrum disorder, and I've had some school districts where parents are very frustrated, and it takes multiple iterations, and they end up coming to a private clinic or to the UT Health Science Center where, you know, a diagnosis is made then.
Okay.
And oftentimes, you know, the school can be a first resource, especially if the parents are having questions. But if they're not happy, it's always good to get a second opinion.
Okay, very good.
I just want to add a little bit to that. So there is a difference between an educational diagnosis and a medical diagnosis. So for the educational diagnosis, the school districts have specific criteria that they're looking for a child to meet in order to be able to receive special education services. So they're looking at, are these traits really impacting them in their school and in their ability to learn? Whereas in the medical diagnosis, we're looking at the DSM and looking at how it's impacting them globally. And as far as getting a diagnosis, I see most of the families needing to get both. So the educational component, if your child is in school, getting them a school diagnosis is very important, because that's where we can make some accommodations for them so that they can really be successful in the classroom. And then oftentimes you'll need a medical diagnosis, and the medical diagnosis can be helpful in order to get therapies. We have a lot of insurances that will not cover therapies unless you have that medical diagnosis, or even getting on waiting lists that the state provides different services for your family and your child, but you need to have that medical diagnosis. So oftentimes it's important to get both of them. And as far as, you know, are they sometimes different? Well, they might be different because we're looking at different criteria, but oftentimes they're the same. I know with us at Autism Community Network, many of the school districts just take our diagnosis, they look at our report, and we'll take that because it's pretty comprehensive. And so if it meets all the criteria that they need, that they would generally do for that educational evaluation, then it could be one and the same.
Okay, and let's do something. Dr. Gia, oh, you have something to say? Great.
So, Berenice talked about the educational component. So, Typically, what we want to remember is that schools provide eligibility for special education programming versus diagnostic pieces. So schools are not medical professionals and cannot provide a medical diagnosis, so that's correct. What we provide in our school systems are eligibility for different programs or for our special education programming. So what our school would provide would be an eligibility for autism under the autism eligibility of special education programming. And Berenice is correct, Dr. De La Cruz is correct in saying that what our schools are looking for is an educational need for programming. So if our kiddos do not demonstrate an educational need or deficits are not present in the educational environment, then more than likely that kiddo is not going to be receiving those support services through special education programming because we have not noted that need. And sometimes that's where we see discrepancies in the diagnostic piece. And we typically do not have our school systems look at the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, our DSM-5, but they do certainly consider a lot of those factors. And additionally, of course, we work side by side with Autism Community Network because we know that many of our families may not have the resources to visit a medical professional to receive a diagnosis. So in many instances, our families do only have the education community to lean on to receive some sort of programming and support. So that becomes a very essential piece for many of our families, you know, connecting to their school professionals and to the school psychologists and our diagnosticians to provide that support system for them, especially if they're not able to go to a doctor to get that diagnosis.
Very good. I'm going to ask you real quick, could y'all pass the mic down and say your name and your title, what you do, because we have such great resources right here up on this stage. So if you don't mind doing that and just pass the mic down, starting Dr. Gia.
Hi, my name is Dr. Gia Edwards, and I'm a behaviorist, and I deal with the family emotional section and all the feelings that families go through when they have a child, adult child, or underage child that is on the spectrum.
Hi, my name is Janet Enriquez, and I'm the Autism Education Specialist at Education Service Center Region 20. So what we do is we support our schools and our districts in the surrounding areas. We provide technical assistance and professional development as well as parent training. So if there's any sorts of needs as families you may have, you can certainly reach out to us and we can get you guys connected to services and programs.
Berenice de la Cruz, I think Jennifer introduced me. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Autism Community Network, and we are a nonprofit here in San Antonio. We provide diagnosis for children under the age of 6. We also have our Family Empowerment Program, and that's a program specially developed for families. We offer free classes, hands-on trainings to help you, give you some strategies on how to work with your children, and then we also give trainings for professionals.
I'm Louise O'Donnell. I'm a pediatric neuropsychologist with the University of Texas Health Science Center, and I work with children and families in my assessment practice. And I also work with children and actually adults in a psychotherapy program as well.
And I'm Dima Stout. I'm the founder of Greatness Coaching. I work with high school and college students with Asperger's and/or ADHD. I also coach parents in a very positive parenting methodology, and I co-facilitate a meetup group for adults with Asperger's. We have about 160 members in our group.
That's great. And so, and Sam joined the panel as well, so if anybody had any questions also for Sam, he will be available for that as well. So right now I would like to introduce you to somebody who's very important to us at Asperger101, and that's our senior editor, Gabriela Lemus, and I'm so glad you're here with us today. She is the one behind the scenes that makes sure that the blogs are placed in there daily. She has majored in English, and she puts that to work for you and for all of us every day on Asperger101. So I am so thrilled that you're here, Bree, but my word, she is the backbone behind Aspergers101, and glad you're with us. And she's been getting all the questions, all of your questions off of Facebook, the Asperger101 Facebook, and is going to go ahead and ask you, the panel, the questions. So Bree?
Thank you, Jennifer. So our first question, it's a little bit long, so I'm just going to try and get as much in there so you can hear as much of it as possible. So one of our readers says, my son is 10 years old. He has Asperger's and ADHD. He's taking Adderall for school. At night to sleep, he takes Seroquel and Remeron. My issue now lately is social skills. He gets bullied a lot. He chews on his shirts and blankets until they're ruined, even on his nails. What can I do to help or stop that? He also has sensory issues with smells and noise, and his anxiety is getting worse. He worries about random things like tornadoes, and he'll Google the topic obsessively. And she's just worried about parenting him as best as she can.
Well, I think we need to look a BCBA, Board Certified Behavior Analyst. So as a BCBA, we're one of the service providers for people on the spectrum. We always look at function-based intervention. So why is the child engaging in this behavior? And then we can develop an intervention around it to meet that same function, or why is he or she doing this? So in this case, Mom, you're telling us that she's chewing on her shirt. And so we need to find out why she's chewing on her shirt or other things. You know, it's the anxiety. What is provoking that anxiety? What are those things that are setting her off? And if she's using it as a coping mechanism for that, is what are other things that maybe are more socially appropriate but can still help to calm her that would meet that same need? So, you know, it's difficult to say without specifically looking at her, but just from past experiences, things that we've done are things like chewing gum. So if it's really like chewing down on something, and a lot of us chew gum, that's, really organizing, as my OT colleagues would say, it really kind of helps you kind of center. And so, that might work. But some of our kids I've had, it's like we have to try different chewing gums, and maybe that flavor they don't like, or I've had kids who don't like that at all, and we have to try other things. And so I would really get your educators or your therapist really involved in helping you determine, why is my child doing this, and how can I meet that same sensory function? And that goes, I believe in the question it said that she's having a lot of other sensory challenges. And the second part that I heard in the question is about, being really anxious and things like tornadoes, and really looking things up. From my experience, it's been that, if the more they find out about a certain topic that really makes them anxious, it's more like it's becoming their best friend. And if I know something about that, then it's going to really help me to feel better about that topic. And so perhaps it could be something that, she can do together with somebody. It's very difficult to say without specifically knowing her, but is looking it up becoming something to soothe her anxiety? And if it's not, then we need to find something else for that as well.
I just wanted to say that in my experience with adults, almost every adult on the spectrum that I know was bullied when they were in upper elementary and junior high school. And I think that we have a responsibility to help the schools teach kids to understand disability, to understand neurological differences, and then have the standard that nobody gets to say a kid can't play. And it's the adults in those children's environment that are going to set the standard for what's expected at school for the kids and protect them.
And I just wanted to add to that, this mother was also concerned about her son being told that he needed to just man up and stop acting like a baby. And if there are better ways to handle that, she's asking.
Also, because this is my section, Mom, also watch what you're doing, how you're feeling, because that is so paramount. We feed off of each other. So as the child's anxiety goes up, don't ignore that your anxiety is going to go up. And if it goes up, take care of you too, because when we take care of ourselves as the adults, we can better help the child because we're clearer. Because when we feed into what's going on here and we can't breathe and we can't think, then some of the opportunities that are out there, we might miss. So don't forget about you.
Okay, we have our next question from one of our readers says, my concern is the hyper-focus. My son gets obsessive about a subject, and he can spend months only talking, playing, and in general dealing with his obsession nonstop. Would trying to restrict him help, and what strategies do you recommend?
Okay. Well, I think that, we have our people with on the spectrum who tend to have these really intense interests. And as Jennifer was saying, this is something we can get involved with as a family. We can use it as something positive, but we have to make it also something social, because sometimes it becomes something that they only do on their own. And so we need to bring in that social component so it really becomes functional. And sometimes it gets to the point where it's really obsessive to where that's all that I want to do, and we have to kind of restrict that at some point, because I don't want to go to school, or I don't want to learn about this. I don't want to go and have dinner together because I want to be stuck on whatever it is that I really love, and I really love my dinosaurs, so I want to learn all about that, or whatever that specific topic might be. And some of the things that can be helpful with that are things like schedule. So, very clearly, depending on their age and their level of understanding, it can go anywhere from, photographs that you can take of, like, this is times when you can, really have time for your special interest, and this is when we're building in other things that you need to do as part of your daily life. Or, if it's a higher functioning child or an adult, it could be, things that you just talk about, maybe an agenda, a planner for when, this is when we talk about certain things.
That triggered something with me as well. If, let's say, you have a child who loves dinosaurs, then think about having them talk to you about the dinosaurs, but also then teach them and show them how to engage in kind of reciprocal conversation. That is, yes, you can tell me all about what you want to say, but then you need to learn and pause and wait for my reaction. And so you're utilizing something that they love, but you're also modeling and teaching the social interaction skills. And with that, I think it makes it very real to them as well.
So our next question, why does a diagnosis matter?
I can start that out. I can't tell you how many, as Jennifer was talking about as well, how many parents cry and say, I know now what is going on. And many, many young adults say that as well. It's really the fear and the anxiety of not knowing. And, I've always likened it, I tell the kids too, that it is, you kind of know what ballpark you're playing in, but you don't necessarily know about the individual player, about who you are. You are, for example, Christopher, who has autism, not autism first. It is one of your many characteristics. And to me, that is the appropriate usage of that diagnosis. It's not something that compartmentalizes and labels and diminishes or turns someone into less than. That is not the purpose of that. And so that's why I think that certainly is important to consider.
And just to add to that, I think the purpose of diagnosis is to understand, your child. And it's very difficult to obtain that diagnosis of autism. I know at our clinic, it can be very difficult for a parent to hear your child has autism. What I always tell parents is your child is no different when you came here than when you're leaving here with a diagnosis. It is still that he or she is still the same person. But at least now you know what is explaining their behavior. And that's really important, because I often hear things like, well, I even heard this at a training that I did for some childcare workers, and they said, well, I don't think he really has autism. I think he's just a brat, and he's just acting like that, like his parents let him act that way. And people are really thinking this, and sometimes you might think that yourself as a parent, you're like, am I allowing my child to behave this way? Or are they really struggling with some differences, even at the brain level? This is not because they can't, it's like they can't control it. This is something that they're just wired differently. And so it really helps you understand your child and be able to kind of give you better peace just to know. Because, as a parent, you still get those looks of, control your child, or why do you allow your child to talk to you like that? Why are they being that way? And I think that I find that, parents can, have more of that peace to know that. And secondly, I think it's for resources. A lot of the times you can't get access to resources unless you have a diagnosis. You can't do this alone. It takes a village. And, if you have a diagnosis, then you can help. And even as you get to be an adult, if you don't have a diagnosis, so many of our adults are very bright and very good, just like Sam. He's, great with technology, but if he goes and gets a job, first of all, it might be difficult for a person on the spectrum to get a job because of that personal and having to do the interview, but then for them to be able to keep that job, and so for them to be able to share that, and that's what we're trying to do as well, is trying to really educate employers about how to really help people with autism and Asperger's to really be successful, because they have so much to offer for our society. So I think, there's a lot of different reasons to do that.
I have one question. Okay. Just recently, I was in contact with someone who is 26, 27, I think I just said this to you, and they're going to get tested. I'm pretty sure that this is what's going on, this Asperger's, okay? You know what he said was, I knew something was wrong with me. It makes sense. It makes sense. And I thank God for meeting Jennifer and everything. And because of this, he came in contact with information. We cannot diminish the fact that information, and someone that is 26 or 27 years old who's been walking around in a fog and thinking something was wrong with him, that now he's got a place, and a healthy and a happy place. So, yeah.
Hi, I wanted to ask a question. I had the privilege of having Dr. O'Donnell diagnose my son last year. He will be 21 in a couple of months. So unfortunately, all this time, we had a lot of questions and a lot of unexplained behaviors. I have yet to do more on my part to help him with help and resources as a young adult just recently diagnosed. So I want to thank you very much as a parent, even though it's been a year, that y'all are offering this meeting. I plan to come to the next 3, and on behalf of the other parents that are here as well. I just wanted to ask, what resources would you recommend this late in the game of diagnosing that are available here locally? I've done research on my own on the internet, but I haven't had the time to make a connection with the group here in San Antonio. And what strategies would you even offer as a parent to me, and even to my son who was just recently diagnosed? So we are still working through a lot of things.
I would say get in contact with Dima.
Yes.
Dima, just to kind of share, the last year, every year, Region 20 provides the Tapestry Conference, and it's a special education conference for parents. And I had the privilege of attending a session that DEMA facilitates, a group of young adults on the spectrum, and adults on the spectrum rather. And they are a fabulous resource. I have a brother that's 18 and will be graduating this May 20th, and he's on the spectrum as well. And I'm going to connect him with a meetup group this year, because I truly believe that as our kiddos get older, their needs change. And, just like everyone else, they're on their journey. And the needs that he had at 5 were different at 7, were different at 12, are certainly different at 18. And, I think Jennifer said it. who better than someone who's living it and gone through those things for you to talk to share? Because I will tell you, I'm a sibling, but I can't understand what he might be feeling, and my journey is different than his, and my mother's journey is different than mine, and so is my father's. So even in respect to the diagnosis piece, the diagnosis is different for every one of us. Receiving a diagnosis is going to be processed differently for all of us. So your son is probably needing to connect with people his age. So I think Dima would probably.
There are some additional resources for adults. Certainly, Texas Workforce Commission, that used to be DARS, Department of Assistive and Rehabilitation Services, is a place to go to get job training, to get a work plan. And I have to say they're improving a lot in their services. They have an autism task force, and they're really trying hard to provide better services to adults with autism. There is a need for additional adult services. That's absolutely true. We have an awful lot of stuff for kids, not nearly enough for adults. And all these little kiddos are growing up, and they're going to need additional supports. So I think that as a parent, that's something that would be good for you to press for, I believe. There are community agencies that help with job placement. The community colleges are pretty good in their disability resources departments in providing accommodations in college. My husband teaches at one of them, and I know that he has kids on the spectrum in his class, and they seem to do very well. So there are some things that you can find for him.
And be sure and stay afterwards and have an opportunity to be able to visit with these expert panels, because I think we could all maybe roll up our sleeves and think of some more for you as well. And I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Jennifer, I wanted to put you on the spot a minute. You mentioned something to me about an initiative that HEB was thinking about doing to help with setting up a safe or a very positive workplace environment for young adults. Do you feel comfortable talking about that?
Well, what I can say on that is that that's a work in progress. And, when we talk about HEB and community, yes, that is something that they are working on, a pilot program there. And I think this is something that could be a template for many other companies. I got a call the other day from Toyota here in town, and they are interested in me coming in and training their employees on Asperger Syndrome, high-functioning autism. And this isn't just San Antonio. They're interested in that on a national basis. This is a new initiative. So I think more and more we're going to see this. And I know that with Microsoft, which that's a no-brainer, that they've done something like that very much as well. This is on the horizon. People are realizing that you can utilize these tools, the people with high-functioning autism or Asperger. Remember that intense interest. Remember that child that's interested in Thomas Tank Engine? Well, someday that Thomas Tank Engine is going to be a real locomotive, and that person could have a job at the Santa Fe. I mean, you never know. So those intense absorbed interests can be utilized and put into work. And so that's an excellent point, and I'm very anxious, yes, to hear about what's going to happen. Bree, we have one more question very, very quickly, and then I'm going to need to wrap it up. One other question and a quick answer.
My 17-year-old daughter has been diagnosed with Asperger's, practices a lot of negative self-talk. Is this a common issue?
Yes.
It is, and I think that that's because our young people have heard so very many negative things about themselves. And that's part of the parenting approach that I use, is to teach parents how to help with that negative self-talk.
And especially if that person has the comorbidities that Jennifer was talking about. Especially if, for example, they have some issues with ADHD. You know, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. And they get that constant feedback. And I really would love for the conversation to turn around, that we talk about what people are doing right, you know, but it's so easy, I think, sometimes to only focus on the negative.
Real quick.
I think especially for girls, what the research is really showing us is that a lot of their self-esteem as they get older is really reflected on what they hear from their peers. So it's not so much what they hear from adults and you as parents, but it's reflective of the things that their peers are saying. And because so many times they might be socially isolated, they might just be negative comments, and so it becomes something they really internalize, and then maybe end up getting a diagnosis when they maybe struggle with things like depression. I'm not sure if this is working, and so it becomes really important to make sure to get some assistance and get those social groups where they really have peers that can validate them. We all have friends that we rely on, and we can say, hey, is this a good choice that I'm making? Is this something good? We need to get each other's input, and we need to have some positive thoughts from our colleagues, not just our parents. It's very, very important for parents, but especially for teenagers and young adults, it's very important to have that same age support group.
Very good information and excellent questions, and we will try to get to your questions on Facebook, but thank you for you panel, all your expertise, your time. I appreciate it. I learned an awful lot this evening myself, and I want to encourage you to stay with us on this series. And if you were, or if you're watching this and you realize that there's somebody else I would like to see, see the program, just know that we are going to have this recorded and placed on Asperger 101. Just look up at the top and see Summer Series. We're going to have each one of these videos cataloged, as well as the PowerPoint presentation, and as well as some additional resources. So give us some little time to get that thing posted on there, but we will have that for you, again, free of charge. Feel free to share it. We want to hear from you. So join us again. The next time will be Tuesday, June the 13th, and the topic is going to be social development. It's going to be a good one. We're going to have an awful lot of things to be able to offer you. And for those that are here, thank you. Stay with us and be able to ask some questions. Autism Lifeline links. Thank you for being here this evening, and we have some information on that. That's a wonderful resource, pulls together all that we need to know. Check them out, Autism Lifeline links. And to all our sponsors, and to HEB, thank you, and Sinclair, thank you, and the San Antonio Public Library. And you can do it, everyone. Thank you for joining us.